Thank you, Zoran. Thank you for that. And just to thank you, Zoran, Boris, Eight, and Alexandra, and all the team on the shift cost action, which is a really, I think, valuable and actually requisite project at this time. So I'm going to try and share the screen, if I can. Okay, so hopefully you can see a full screen at this stage. You might, yeah, I'm getting the thumbs up from Alex, so thanks for that. So as was mentioned, Ed Byrne is my name. I'm a colleague of Alexandra and University College Cork in the southwest of Ireland, and I'm from obviously the engineering background, and I and a number of colleagues across our university and indeed beyond have been working on some of these issues for the last, well, at least a decade at this stage. So I suppose, as I said, the project, the Shift project, I just wanted to obviously speak to that today, particularly on working group 1 as we kick off. So I had a look at your website, and I see you want to create a transdisciplinary hub in advancing societal transformations in the face of climate change. So I think there's sort of 3 things there that are interconnected. Coming from the social sciences, humanities background, looking at social, political, economic, environmental, technological contexts, and a particular interest in working group 1 and concepts and theoretical framings and knowledge co-production, which I would suggest comes from transdisciplinary approaches that we can co-produce knowledge in that regard. So I'm going to speak to some of these things here in terms of, particularly in terms of the concepts and theoretical framings, as well as knowledge co-production in this broader context. Also, I suppose, at the moment, in the last week, well, 4 days actually, across the country, we've had, last week we had a visit from the President of the United States of America. So he was north and south, and a lot of it was reflecting on the Good Friday Agreement, which was an agreement signed 25 years ago, which brought to an end one of the longest lasting conflicts in Europe post-war. And he was also reflecting on familial ties, but on a number of occasions, including in this address to the House of the Oireachtas, which is the upper and lower houses of Parliament in Dublin, he made a number of points, including that our world stands at an inflection point where the choices we make today are literally going to determine the future or the history of this world for the next 4 to 5 decades, literally, not figuratively. And I think we can all really see that and agree on that we are at this sort of inflection point, and that is something that I think this particular cost project certainly speaks to. He went on to elaborate in some aspects, in terms of, for example, in the technological realm, artificial intelligence right now holds enormous promise, but also enormous concern. So, from a sustainability perspective, many might think that AI can be very useful in terms of addressing some of the issues that are out there. On the other hand, just the energy costs of ChatGPT and some of these AI initiatives are huge, and we see even in our country, in this country, up to 50% extra electricity is required for data centers in a 1 decade period over the next 10 years. It's adding 50% to our energy demand. So when we're going to a green revolution and so on, this is creating major problems. And a lot of data centers are for things like TikTok and social media to store those. So, you have to ask, is that the future of humanity? Is this what's going to save us or not? But then one point he did make then, and there are issues, of course, in, drilling for fossil fuels in Alaska and so on over his presidency. But at the same time, at least he's admitting it, and once one admits it and faces up to it and suggests it, one can be held to account. But he suggested the single existential threat to the world is climate change. And there's an urgency. We don't have a lot of time, and that's a fact. And that is a fact. And we're all well aware of that, as we see from the IPCC reports quite recently. And again, this project speaks to that. So looking at the project itself, we're looking at transdisciplinary researchers engaging with transformation across social, political, economic, environmental, and technological contexts. And if we look at that, then I think, the technological, in many respects, is at the apex. It's kind of the driving force. It's the building of whether it be AI or whether it be green technologies and so on. But feeding into that are the social, economic, and environmental, the traditional sustainability pillars, and political then drives that. But also, I suggest that there are other contexts as well that are at large there. But these are driving towards, perhaps, we might suggest we're orienting towards sustainability at present in terms of our society, not just climate, but also biodiversity loss, etc. And we need to reorient towards sustainability. So this is again what this project is about. Other domains, I suppose, are the legal, the political feeds into our laws and the enforcement of such laws, but also underpinning the political are philosophical, and Zoran is with us as a theologist, so the theological field is philosophical. And beneath that again then are narratives, stories, and metaphor, worldviews, framings, paradigms. Again, something that this particular work group is very involved in and interested in. So really, when we look at the apex of the technological, and we have green technologies, green energy, artificial intelligence, smart societies, nanotech, and so on. But really, that's driven by the philosophical, by the social scientists, and by the worldviews, framings, and paradigms beneath that, and also the social, economic, and environmental, and so on. So really, all of these things emanate from various different disciplines, whether it be applied social sciences, finance, economics, science, law, governance, politics, philosophy, theology, humanities, social sciences. And really, if we want to reorient that triangle here, if we want to change the course, we all really do need to work together to change that, I suppose, turn that Titanic in a sense. And again, the Titanic was built in 1912 in Ireland, Belfast, and its last port of call was in Cove near Cork, before it went down. But it feels like, we are heading towards that iceberg, and we do need to actually try and turn things around. But if we're going to have any hope of doing it at all, we do need to get a handle on, particularly at the lower end there of the triangle, to actually manipulate it and turn the thing around, rather than sometimes be driven just by the technology itself. So that sort of fed into the title of the talk I'm giving today, which is also the title of a chapter in a book that was published this year by a Danish colleague and a number of other editors as well. Engineering, Social Sciences, and the Humanities: Has Their Conversations Come of Age? And the chapter that we put together, myself and Alexandra, along with 12 other colleagues from UCC, from your own university, as well as John Barry, who's, as Alexandra was mentioning, is a political scientist from Queen's University, our sister college in Belfast, and Clodagh Harris as well, mentioned here. We put together this this chapter, and really, it's a recognition of the complementary and agonistic duality between the social sciences and humanities and engineering and science, and the requirement for both. And it's something that we've been working at with Alex and with others across our university for the last decade and beyond. And we feel we need to do this as a means of breaking down the walls of interdisciplinary silence to start with, but also if we really want to authentically engage with the issues around sustainability. So in that chapter, we looked at a number of exemplars of things we're doing, but we also reflected on the current situation. And technological developments have emanated from economic and policy drivers. More recent technological developments that we mentioned in AI and smart societies and green technology and so on. But what's been less developed has been an initial regard for broader societal contexts, ethical implications, unintended consequences, precautionary principle, and local public acceptability. There's a gap there, perhaps. And particularly when we're looking at wicked societal problems, such as around broader sustainability issues, such as around climate change and biodiversity loss and so on. These are both normative and deeply contested, which necessarily, therefore, impinge upon the ethical and the social domains, as well as the environmental, technical, and economic spheres. So necessarily, all the aspects of that triangle there on the right are required. And therefore, we'd argue a holistic, integrative, and complexity embracing paradigm is required to embrace each and all of the aforementioned domains. And this, a repercussion of this type of paradigm is a common realization of the need for the social sciences and humanities, as well as engineering and science, to work together. As Niels Bohr, the Nobel Prize winner in 1922 for his pioneering work on subatomic physics and nuclear physics, suggested, he was not just a Nobel Prize winner, but he also was recipient of the Order of the Elephant, which is Denmark's highest ranked honor. And he had to put together a crest, a personal crest and motto for himself in receiving that award. And for that, he had the logo Contraria sunt complementia. So complementa. So essentially, with the image of the yin and yang, the complementary opposites, agonistic complementarity between, well, as we suggest, the social sciences and the humanities. And this is coming from a hard-nosed physicist, seeing the value of this. I think this is important. So, this is an image of our own university, our own quad. It's from 1840s. It was built, and our university is divided into 4 colleges of arts, humanities, social sciences, science, engineering, and food science, and then medicine and health, and business and law. And again, this has been some work we've been doing over the past decades, as I say, and we feel that each of those 4 colleges and each of the disciplines within the colleges need to come together to look at global problems. But also we need to reach out from outside, beyond the pale, or beyond without the university itself, in the community, and draw on the indigenous knowledges, the community knowledge, the experiential knowledge that's out there as well, in order to authentically address these issues around our sustainability and non-sustainability crisis. A previous book that we published in 2017 looked at that. That followed on from a conference, so Transdisciplinary Perspectives on Transitions and Sustainability. And again, the context and ethos of that was essentially, and not just within our own university, but across the university ecosystem generally across the world, we feel that the silo-wise constraints of the university, or should that be a multiversity as opposed to a university, we found that the whole was not greater than the sum of the parts. And we're broadly within the increasing ecological degradation, social upheaval, and economic inequality that we're experiencing across the world. We felt, we're really, as academics, making relatively feeble attempts to address the grand challenges around sustainability, whatever we might say. So that's the motivation, I suppose, for some of this work. And when we talk about transdisciplinarity in terms of this book, we looked at, meanings and contexts and so on, of all that. We suggested that it's about seeking emergent knowledge, about new knowledge, and this emergent knowledge can only be built on strong disciplinary pillars. So we need the disciplines. We need absolutely that knowledge and that wisdom and that insight from each of the disciplines that are there. But also we need to go beyond them. We need to transcend them to create this new knowledge. So as you can see there in the 4 posts in Spain there, if you take out one of the pillars, the whole thing comes tumbling down. So we do need disciplines, but also transdisciplinarity is accessing novel, new knowledge, genuinely new knowledge that can only come not from within one discipline or 2 disciplines, but across the board. So it requires a particular ethos as well. And it's not just we saying that. The United Nations Environmental Programme suggests that there is a requirement for a paradigmatic shift, to pun intended in terms of the shift, needed for what they describe as a great transformation. And on the paper, the chapter that we've written, Alex, myself, and others, we suggest as a result of our continued inaction, deep and rapid decarbonisation processes imply fundamental structural changes are needed. And this is from UNEP. Changes which can only be effected and accompanied by deep-rooted shifts in values, norms, and consumer culture and worldviews, which are inescapably part of the great sustainability transformation. So UNEP, every year they have an emissions gap report, and that's what they quote from the 2019 report. And really, as we suggest then, the changes required are largely non-technological, go beyond the technology. And this reads as a powerful call to arms for social sciences and humanities, and the embedded knowledge, skills, and values within them to work front and center as equals with engineering and science in eliciting transformative paradigmatic change, which is what's required. And if we go forward to the emissions gap report of 2022, the most recent one, it's entitled The Closing Window. So we see the urgency, as was mentioned there by President Biden last week, the urgency in terms of, what's ahead of us, and as certainly as is articulated in the most recent climate report by the experts. So it's not a one-way train though as well. It's not just about engineering needing the sociologists and the social sciences and so on. It works the other way too. So again, in our chapter, we suggested left to its own devices, sometimes sociology can often remain within problem defining and problem analysis domains, just sort of defining and analyzing the problems without actually going much further than that, thus constraining its real practical and transformative potential. So too much navel gazing, and perhaps social scientists and humanities persons can really add value to our projects and so on, and we really need them to do that, to work with them, whereas engineers oftentimes talk about the problem solving and then neglect the problem for framing. So one without the other is just really not going to cut it. So we need both framing, defining, analysis, and also addressing of the issues. So therefore we do need to work together. So really it is like the metaphor of the of that sort of Titanic. We're heading towards unsustainability, and we really need to kind of turn this thing around. So getting that triangle and grabbing it by those angles there and just turning this thing around towards sustainability if we can. That seems a big task, but it's certainly only a task that we can do only if we're all working, ad unum, at one, working with each other in that ethos. So I'm just going to reflect just the remaining part then of my talk, just on the bottom rungs of that triangle, the narratives, the stories, and the metaphor, the worldviews, framing, and paradigm, as it relates to the first part of the first work group of the project. So stories, narratives, metaphor are indeed central to this change, to this transformation. And again, just to reflect on that, again, just a quote from our chapter: we're moved to act in response to stories, narratives, myths, and metaphors, as opposed to cold, hard facts. So we've seen that from, we're not acting in the face of knowing all the facts about greenhouse gas emissions and so on, and they increasing, and our requirement to reduce them quite substantially, quite quickly. We're not actually globally, we're not capable, or we're not doing that, even though we do know the facts. So while scientists and engineers can identify and source the source and the amount of greenhouse gases we emit, and indeed can calculate how much is needed to reduce them, the key question of why do we continue to pump them into our environment is really one that's perhaps, undoubtedly social scientists are better equipped to address. And sometimes, engineers delude themselves in suggesting that, and scientists, that, if we give people the cold hard facts, if we educate people, they will see the light and they will change. But of course, it's about stories, narratives, myths, and metaphor is what drives people to change. And this moves on to another book that we published actually last year, Metaphor, Transformation, and Transdisciplinarity, again about 12 academics from across the disciplines in UCC and one or two from outside. Looking at the idea of metaphor and how that can actually be used and help us to transform. And indeed, we suggested, some researchers suggest that, including Ian McGilchrist, the neuroscientist, that essentially metaphors actually frame the very basis of our understanding of the world around us. So it's not about putting metaphors or actually kind of come after language and so on. It's the other way around. That metaphors is how we understand the world around us, and that in turn then, in the left hemisphere of the brain, is translated into words and language. So words and language only come after metaphor, not the other way around. So metaphor is really, really important, and that you know, in a chapter that I write, metaphor together with narrative, story, and myth, as well as other right hemisphere constructs such as art and music, are really the only means of sufficiently moving individuals and communities and societies to embark on the type of transformational change that's actually required to achieve authentic sustainability. So the facts alone will leave us cold, and this is the only way we can do that. And you know, marketeers and so on clearly understand that, as indeed do many others. But we need to orient them in a way that we can actually move towards sustainability. So narratives, myth, metaphor are central, but these then are underpinned by worldviews, framings, and paradigms. Again, something that you're looking at in working group 1 of this particular project. So I'm just going to talk just about worldviews, framings, and paradigms as well, presently, just to sort of finish up. I suppose there's competing paradigmatic metaphors of, on the one hand, complementary agonistic dualism. This dualism whereby, you know, as was mentioned in Yin and Yang, as mentioned by Niels Bohr and recognized by him, versus an antagonistic dualism, a Cartesian dualism of, you know, separation. And that then also another way of putting it is deep mutual interconnection is one paradigmatic metaphor all around us, versus an atomistic Cartesian separation, again, separation of objects around. So these are competing paradigmatic metaphors, and I suppose one can be, the one on the left there can be characterized as an integrative worldview, and the one on the right might be more the modern worldview of Descartes, which has been hugely successful over the last 400 to 500 years. So I just want to just sort of unpackage that for a little bit and look at some of the stuff that we've done. Annick de Wit is a Dutch researcher who's looked at some of these things, and she's come up with a worldview test and a worldview model whereby she looks at traditional, modern, postmodern, and integrative worldviews for a quadrant model of different types of worldviews. And spoken on this or written on this in that book from 2017 as it applies to sustainability narratives. So I suppose the traditional worldview is based on certainty and truth, where you have unique divine order, and it's bound up with natural cycles of day and night, winter and summer, and so on. The modern worldview is where we can manipulate the world around us, as Descartes suggested. We can become lords and possessors of nature through reductionist science, and we've been able to do that, you know, in terms of, you know, electricity, lighting, computers, automatic intelligence, and so on. We've been able to mold the world around us. Postmodern kind of kick back from that, kind of more deconstructivist skepticism kicks in, sort of a disappointment with the promises of modernity. So therefore they suggested, unlike modern approach where certainty and truth is true science, postmodern suggested there's no certainty, there's no unique truth, and there's pluralistic tolerance instead. And then an integrative approach or worldview would try to take, in fact, the best of each of the other three. You know, take the traditional and indigenous knowledges and wisdom, take the modern and technology that goes with that, and take the inherent uncertainty that exists in our complex societies and systems, and actually, you know, see that there is actually truth, even though there's no uncertainty, and try to find that truth in this, you know, deep interconnectedness and complexity, and to recognize that. So that's aligns with transdisciplinary approaches, I suppose. De Wit has as a test and looks at a number of questions, or asks people to do the test. If you do the test, you can say which of various different statements you most closely align with. And just some comments there, just mentioned from one of the questions. So an integrative worldview would be, you know, I feel part of a vast interconnected whole, and this is life, the universe. Whereas a modern worldview would be more about your social position and achievements are more important to you in terms of defining oneself. So I'm just going to have a look at those two in particular presently. So if we look at the modern versus the integrative, well, the integrative is about agonistic dualism, the complementary agonistic dualism, and recognizing that. Modern worldview is about recognizing an antagonistic Cartesian dualism, essentially. If we go back to classical times, Heraclitus, you know, had a number of fragments that remain extant, and he suggested, great ancient Greek philosophers suggested the harmonious structure of the world depends upon opposite tension, like that of the bow and the lyre. So this idea of the, you know, the that there's a complementary element to a number of aspects of the world around us. And of course, that's recognized also in Eastern philosophy, the yin and the yang, as we mentioned earlier by Bohr. Contra this, you have, I suppose, from the 16th, 17th century, Descartes' philosophy sought certainty through rationality, which is based on antagonistic dualism, separation between physical, mechanical body and the subjective mind and the soul are separate. And of course, that then has been very popular in science. You know, the scientist goes into the lab and has, you know, manipulates the world around them, but is detached from the laboratory itself. And that then has fed into a number of other disciplines in terms of the way we look at the world. Of course, this was a hugely popular and useful philosophy and worldview that, you know, in the turmoil of the 17th century Europe, where it was, you know, the 30 Years' War, the sectarian war that was going on in there at the time, the turmoil and local temporal climate change when there was a general cooling. This was a resounding success because this gave us some certainty and was the basis of, I suppose, our modern systems. But it also had a number of drawbacks as we're seeing to this day. If we go and look at systems ecology, we find actually Robert G. Ladovich, who's originally a chemical engineer, but also a systems ecologist from University of Florida and Maryland as well, suggests that, you know, in systems ecology, look at ecological systems, it's actually been quantitatively shown that sustainable ecosystems actually have this agonistic dualism, this dynamic balance between opposing but necessary tendencies. On the one hand, efficiency, on the other hand, redundancy. So systems that actually are sustainable, or in that window of vitality in the center here, actually display a balance between the two. And this has been quantitatively shown. Essentially, therefore, sustainability is a dialectical balance between efficiency and redundancy. That's one way it could be framed. So efficiency is on the left-hand side here. So you're going towards more and more efficiency. If systems become too efficient, then they collapse. At the same time, if they become too much redundancy in the system, they can't survive either. So it's somewhere in between they exist. And what does that actually mean? Well, if we look at two systems here, two example systems that he shows, on the left-hand side, we have more redundancy in the system, an ecological system. On the right-hand side, it's far more efficient. There's only 3 species shown there. So on the left, what happens if the large fish, therefore, die out, if they get diseased or whatever, or a virus hits them and they all die out? Well, on this ecosystem on the left-hand side, well, then there are other species that the alligators can feed upon. They can feed upon the turtles or the snakes, and they can still stay alive. The prawns can be fed upon by the turtles and the snakes, so their numbers stay in check. And, you know, other species can, maybe the large fish can come back into the system in due course, and the ecosystem sustains itself. It's sustainable. On the right-hand side, we have a very efficient system where alligators only eat large fish, only eat prawns. But if the large fish are knocked out, well, then what happens to the alligators? Perhaps they too can become extinct because they have nothing to eat, perhaps. And then maybe there's an explosion in the number of prawns that are around. So again, that's showing that ecosystems can become too efficient, that you need this diversity in the system. You need redundancy and resilience in the system. At the same time, you know, if you have too much redundancy and resilience, then you can't build up an ecosystem or a society or whatever. So this idea of this dialectic balance that goes back to Heraclitus and also Eastern philosophies is shown in terms of our ecological systems and indeed in terms of our social systems. The goal of the modern paradigm is about achieving control, order, and efficiency. So going to the right of that curve there that's mapped out. However, the goal of an integrated paradigm would be some balance between them, between efficiency on the one hand and creativity on the other, between order on the one hand and flexibility on the other. and that allows systems to sustain themselves. As Moran, sociologist, French sociologist, suggests, in a universal pure order, there will be no innovation, no creation, no evolution, there will be no life, no human existence. At the same time, neither will any existence be possible in pure disorder, because we know an element of stability. So you need both order and disorder, whether it be organizations, ecosystems, or societies. And therefore, the concept of sustainability, as we say in the book, may be posited within a dialectical and process hierarchical framework whereby contingency, change, and evolution are enduring system characteristics. So it fits in with broader conceptions of sustainability as an evolving and contingent quality, rather than some ultimate point destination entailing optimization of a unique endpoint located at the right-hand extreme of Ulanovic's rainbow, a sort of crock of gold exemplified by the mirage of 100% efficiency. So, the second law of thermodynamics in engineering and science tells us that, 100% efficiency is not possible at any rate. So this idea of control and efficiency is something that doesn't work. We've seen that in this country, actually, in the 1840s, 175 years ago, there were actually 8 million people living in Ireland, the island. There are now only 7 million people. It's the only European country that actually the population has decreased in the last 175 years. It's decreased over most of that time. The reason for that was this was the site of the last European famine. We had a very efficient food system. People only ate potatoes, and that caused population growth and explosion to 8 million people around the middle of the 19th century. The downside of that was when the potato failed year on year, there was mass starvation. So 1 million people died, 1 million people emigrated. The likes of Joe Biden's ancestors emigrated all over the world to find a better place. On the other hand, if we go to the other extreme, if we have complete diversity, complete disorder, well, then we can't build a society. Civilization, agriculture, and so on is built by sort of a certain taming of that order. So somewhere in between, if we have hugely intensive agriculture as well, that has issues in terms of water quality and so on, energy use, etc. But if we can find this balance, a regenerative agriculture which shifts the paradigm, find something in the middle, then we're in a better place. Again, if we look at energy transformation, there's a big need, obviously, for green energy, whether it be onshore or offshore wind farms and so on. At the same time, then sometimes local communities push back against that because they don't see the value to themselves for that. If it's just to build data centers, then what value is that? So perhaps a balance would require that also, policy and governments would look at microgeneration supports, community wind farms, local micro generation, either of solar or wind and so on, as a balance, in addition to the large scale projects that clearly are needed, offshore and onshore wind, etc. I'd just like to sort of finish up then in terms of looking at the idea of mutual interconnection against separation, again, the integrative versus modern worldview, and where that actually has popped up and pops up in various different guises and histories indeed. Indigenous worldviews, John Ehrenfeld, who talks about sustainability and looks at sustainability as flourishing, suggests that, some Native Americans talk of being part of the web of life. They connect everything to everything, and so develop a respect for everything as sacred. If everything is connected, then we're not going to defile the earth around us. It'd be taboo to do so, and hence we see it as sacred. So, this spirituality, these practices, daily living, that reflect a sense of connectedness to the world, and we have to recover this sense of sacredness of the world, even the cosmos that develops, as he suggests. If we look at medieval pre-modern worldviews, those kind of ideas held as well, including in the actions and the theology of St. Francis, who was proposed as patron saint for ecologists by Lynn White in 1967 in a seminal paper in Science on the historical roots of our ecological crisis, and was thereafter made a patron saint of ecology in the late 70s. The birth of contemporary environmentalism in the 1960s, Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, again focused on life on Earth being a history of interactions between living things and the surroundings. So again, the interconnection is shown as something that's really important. terms of politics, the awakening of the climate crisis, I was certainly awoken in that respect by the Oscar Award-winning Inconvenient Truth in 2006 by Al Gore. And again, in the corresponding book, he suggested our capacity for analysis sometimes leads us through an arrogant illusion that we're somehow not connected to nature, but we're inextricably tied, as he suggests. And then moving forward, even in terms of religion and contemporary theological narratives, Pope Francis, Care for a Common Home encyclical, Laudato Si, from 2015, again suggests that everything is interconnected. And his background is, again, he's done some initially a chemical technologist, chemical engineer in Argentina. So he understands the different aspects of the planet, physical, chemical, biological, interrelated. And we need to broaden our vision to find another type of progress, which is healthier, more human, more social, more integral, getting at that integral. I suppose this idea of integral cosmology, universal interconnection has been with us, a long time in terms of even both from ecology, but also from theology. The universe as a communion of subjects rather than a collection of objects, is what Thomas Pray suggested it is. And really, we lose our souls if we can't see the stars at night. So I suppose that's just a sort of a whirlwind. I look through narrative, stories, metaphor, and worldview framing paradigms, but how they're interconnected with the social, economic, legal, political, philosophical, and technological aspects, and how they need to be aligned. Certainly require necessary partnerships. And if we want to shift the levers for transformation towards sustainability, that's something we need to look at. Okay, so I think I'm about half an hour in now, so I think I'll leave it at that, and perhaps we can have a discussion there.
All right, and thank you very much, Edmond. Thanks for this exciting